By the time the sun breached the eastern peaks of the Zagros Mountains, the ridgeline north of Bandar Abbas was nothing more than a chain of smoking black craters. Heavy concrete blast doors hung twisted off their hinges, and the shattered remains of 6 strategic missile launchers burned deep inside collapsed tunnels. Down in the narrow canyon below, the road was completely choked by a graveyard of 26 heavy command vehicles. Radar vans and communications trucks were flattened into the rock, their diesel fuel feeding thick black fires that choked the morning air. The coastal defense network that guarded the eastern approach to the Strait of Hormuz had been physically erased. The shock was not simply that the mountain fortress was gone. The true nightmare for the surviving crews was that the night sky had remained completely empty, and their radars had never seen the attack coming. To understand how the most fortified mountain battery in the region was systematically annihilated, the battle has to return to 2:45 in the morning. 2:45 in the morning on the 21st of June, 2026, at 27 degrees 18 minutes north and 56 degrees 17 minutes east. The high-altitude air over the Persian Gulf was thin and freezing, while the coastal desert below baked under heavy, windless humidity. Miles above the black water, a strike package of United States Air Force F-35 Lightning. 2 stealth fighters drove silently toward the Iranian coastline. There were no radio transmissions. There were no external pylons carrying weapons. The aircraft were completely sealed, their internal weapon bays loaded with heavy bunker-penetrating munitions, and their radar cross-sections reduced to the size of small birds. Down on the ground, the early warning stations scattered around the strategic port of Bandar Abbas were actively sweeping the skies. Massive phased array radars pushed megawatts of electromagnetic energy out over the water, aggressively searching for any approaching threat. Before the siren sounded, the canyon was silent. Dozens of heavy diesel generators throbbed in the dark, pushing power into the subterranean missile network. The operators inside the 26 command vehicles felt completely secure, protected by millions of tons of solid rock and a layered air defense umbrella that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The green screens deep inside the mountain command bunkers showed absolutely nothing but clear skies. Then, at 2:51 in the morning, an infrared sensor mounted high on a coastal ridge registered a fleeting thermal anomaly. It was not a hard radar track. It was a microscopic shift in heat, a faint exhaust signature brushing against the upper atmosphere. The automated system instantly flagged the temperature spike. Inside the mobile command vehicles parked in the canyon, warning sirens shrieked to life. Red combat lights began flashing violently across the tactical consoles, shattering the illusion of safety. The thermal warning was weak, flashing and disappearing on the monitors, but it was moving terrifyingly fast toward the coastline. The sector commander did not wait for visual confirmation. He immediately ordered a full combat alert. High above the cloud layer, the American pilots saw the Iranian network suddenly react. Through their advanced helmet displays, the stealth pilots watched the electromagnetic spectrum light up as the mountain base panicked below them. The ground radars began frantically cycling through different search frequencies, pushing maximum power into the atmosphere, desperately trying to lock onto a target that their screens insisted did not exist. The stealth jets did not alter their course. They pushed their throttles forward, sliding invisibly through the radar beams, driving directly into the densest ring of the Iranian air defense zone. The undetected approach was flawless, and the heaviest coastal batteries in the region were now trapped directly under the crosshairs. The sector commander did not wait for visual confirmation, immediately ordering a full combat alert across the entire Bandar Abbas mountain defensive line. Deep inside the Zagros rock, the klaxons began to scream. Thousands of feet of reinforced concrete echoed with the piercing wail of the sirens. Red combat strobes flooded the subterranean corridors, washing the pale rock walls in flashes of emergency light. Hundreds of missile operators, technicians, and security personnel threw off their blankets and sprinted down the narrow tunnels. Heavy combat boots pounded against wet steel grating. They did not know what was coming, but they knew the protocol for a thermal breach. They had to get the weapons ready to fire and the command structure out of the kill zone. The mountain fortress was designed to survive a massive bombardment, but its weapons could only fire if they were exposed to the sky. Massive hydraulic systems began to whine under immense pressure. Across the ridgeline, 6 heavy steel blast doors, each weighing over 40 tons, slowly rolled back on reinforced iron tracks. The grinding sound of metal on metal cut through the quiet desert night. As the doors opened, The cold night air rushed into the tunnels, meeting the suffocating heat of idling diesel engines. Inside the caverns, the heavy multi-axle launcher vehicles were already vibrating. The drivers pressed their boots down on the throttles, sending thick clouds of black exhaust billowing out into the starlit sky. The launch tubes, packed with heavy anti-ship cruise missiles designed to sink carriers and block the strait, began to elevate. Hydraulic arms pushed the massive green cylinders upward, locking them at a 60-degree angle toward the southern horizon. The crews loaded their firing codes, waiting for the command vehicles to feed them a target. But down in the canyon, the command structure was fighting for its own survival. The 26 heavy trucks that controlled the mountain battery were parked in a tight line along the narrow valley floor. The convoy commander knew that a stationary command post was a dead command post. He grabbed his radio, screaming for the entire column to disperse into the secondary tunnels. 26 heavy diesel engines roared to life almost simultaneously. The noise trapped between the canyon walls was deafening. The drivers threw the massive trucks into gear, their heavy tires spinning and kicking up clouds of white desert dust as they fought for traction on the unpaved mountain road. Radar vans, mobile power generators, and armored communication hubs began to roll forward, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The column stretched for nearly a mile, a crawling snake of high-value targets desperately trying to reach the safety of the reinforced bunkers further down the rocky pass. On the peaks directly above them, the short-range air defense units scrambled to create a protective umbrella. Gun crews jumped into the steel seats of their rapid-fire anti-aircraft artillery. Missile operators powered up their localized tracking systems, their eyes straining against the black sky. Their short-range radars were spinning violently, pushing waves of energy into the empty air. Every soldier on the mountain was looking up, gripping their weapons, waiting for the roar of jet engines or the bright streak of an incoming missile, but the sky remained perfectly silent. The entire mountain was awake, armed, and burning thousands of gallons of fuel, pointing millions of dollars of firepower at a threat they could not see. The stealth fighters were now less than 20 kilometers away, and the convoy was fully exposed. With the stealth fighters now less than 20 kilometers out, the electronic architecture of the Iranian defense network was suddenly overwhelmed. High above the canyon, the American pilots initiated their electronic attack sequence, shifting their advanced radar arrays from passive listening to active electromagnetic suppression. Invisible waves of concentrated jamming energy flooded down from the freezing stratosphere, crashing into the Iranian sensors like a physical wave. The stealth jets were not just hiding from the radar. They were actively tearing the enemy early warning systems apart from the inside. Down in the mobile command vehicles bouncing along the rocky canyon road, the tactical picture violently collapsed. The glowing green monitors inside the armored trucks fractured into violent storms of white noise and cascading static. Solid tracks vanished instantly. False ghost contacts flooded the screens by the hundreds, spinning wildly across the displays before disappearing. The automated warning sirens, which moments ago were tracking a faint thermal signature, now shrieked with critical system failure alerts. Radar operators slammed their hands against their consoles, desperately twisting dials and switching search frequencies. But the American jamming signal followed them across the entire spectrum. The screens remained a blinding sea of digital snow. The mountain fortress had been completely blinded. The air defense commanders on the peaks realized the terrifying reality of their situation. This was not a system malfunction. They were being aggressively suppressed by a high-power airborne emitter sitting directly above their heads, yet they still could not see a single aircraft in the sky. Above the chaos of the blinded valley, the American flight leader stabilized his attack geometry. The strike package maintained absolute radio silence, operating in perfect synchronization through a secure encrypted data link. Instead of relying on radar, the pilots activated their high-resolution electro-optical targeting pods. The advanced cameras pierced through the darkness and the thin desert clouds, zooming directly in on the massive heat signatures blooming across the Zagros rock. Inside the cockpits, the digital displays on the pilots' helmet visors lit up with sharp, glowing infrared outlines. The view was brutally clear. They could see the 6 heavy missile launchers sitting totally exposed on the concrete mountain pads, their hydraulic arms raised toward the sky. They could see the intense white heat radiating from the thick diesel exhaust of the 26 command vehicles as the convoy desperately crawled along the canyon floor. The thermal contrast between the cold midnight rock and the burning heavy engines made the targets completely unmistakable. The flight leader's gloved fingers moved across the weapon controls. The targeting computers rapidly processed the variables of altitude, wind speed, and ground velocity. On the visor displays, glowing digital brackets drifted across the screen and snapped violently shut around the shapes of the heavy launchers and the lead convoy trucks. The symbology locked tightly in place, changing from yellow to a solid, lethal red. A low, steady tone echoed inside the pilots' headsets, confirming that the firing solutions were complete. The invisible jets had successfully locked their weapons onto the heaviest coastal defense battery in the region, and the frantic defenders below were entirely defenseless against the impending strike. With the targeting symbology locked solid red across the visors of the American pilots, the invisible strike package reached its release point. High above the blinded Zagros Mountain range, the attack commander broadcast a single, encrypted firing code across the secure data link. The order was executed instantly. Across the entire formation, the smooth, radar-absorbent bellies of the F-35 stealth fighters split open. The heavy hydraulic doors of the internal weapon bays swung outward with violent force, exposing the lethal payloads to the freezing, thin atmosphere. For a fraction of a second, the perfect aerodynamic profile of the stealth jets was broken, creating a massive roar of high-altitude wind resistance that shook the airframes. Down in the valley, the blinded Iranian radar network was already too overwhelmed by cascading electronic static to notice the sudden, momentary spikes on their ruined screens. Deep inside the dark weapon bays, heavy mechanical release clamps violently snapped open. Dozens of precision-guided bunker-penetrating bombs fell away from the aircraft, dropping into the black void. They did not fall like unguided iron. The moment the heavy steel munitions cleared the turbulent slipstream of the jet engines, their internal computer brains woke up. Pop-out glide wings snapped into place with a sharp, metallic clack, locking the heavy bombs onto an aggressive downward glide path. Internal receivers synchronized with targeting lasers, feeding exact coordinate updates into the steering fins. The ordnance began its silent, terrifying plunge through the night sky. There were no rocket motors to ignite. There were no fiery exhaust trails to give away their approach. They fell like massive steel spears, using gravity and perfectly angled fins to cut through the freezing air at hundreds of miles per hour. The heavy steel casings were designed for one purpose: to punch through feet of solid rock and reinforced concrete before detonating. Down below, the battlefield was a chaotic symphony of ground-level panic. The short-range anti-aircraft artillery continued to fire blindly from the lower ridges, sending thousands of glowing red tracer rounds arcing wildly into empty space. The heavy command trucks of the convoy kept burning diesel fuel as they smashed their bumpers together along the narrow canyon floor, their drivers terrified and desperate to reach the deep underground tunnels. The headlights of the 26 vehicles illuminated thick clouds of yellow dust, creating a chaotic, glowing ribbon of light that made them even easier for the falling bombs to track. Up on the exposed mountain pads, the crews of the 6 heavy coastal defense launchers were completely unaware of the steel raining down directly over their heads. The operators were screaming into their radios over the deafening roar of the idling generators, begging the mobile command center for targeting data, so they could launch their anti-ship cruise missiles into the strait. Their massive hydraulic arms were fully extended, the heavy green launch tubes angled perfectly toward the sea, waiting for an order that would never come. The ground crews stood on the open concrete, sweating in the heavy desert heat, completely exposed to the open sky. The heavy penetrator bombs broke through the final, thin cloud layer. Their optical sensors actively tracked the intense heat of the massive launchers and the scrambling convoy below. Small steering fins made microscopic, rapid-fire adjustments, pulling the massive steel casings perfectly into line with the concrete bunker doors and the armored vehicles. The black air directly above the canyon was now filled with dozens of 2,000-pound munitions dropping at absolute terminal velocity. The point of no return had been crossed. The invisible trap had been completely sprung, and the crushing weight of the incoming strike was now only 3 seconds away from tearing the Zagros Mountain rock apart. 3 seconds later, the silent plunge of the heavy steel munitions ended as the first wave of penetrators slammed dead center into the exposed concrete pads of the Zagros Mountain ridge. There was no warning explosion, only the terrifying kinetic crack of 2,000-pound hardened steel casings, punching straight through the thick green launch tubes of the coastal defense batteries at absolute terminal velocity. A fraction of a second later, the programmable delayed action fuses triggered deep inside the internal missile chambers. The entire mountain crest erupted into a blinding flash of white light. 6 massive orange fireballs detonated simultaneously across the high ridges, instantly vaporizing the heavy anti-ship cruise missiles still locked inside their cylinders. The sympathetic detonation of thousands of pounds of highly volatile solid rocket fuel created a catastrophic rolling chain reaction. The 40-ton multi-axle launch vehicles were lifted completely off the ground by the immense overpressure. Thick armored chassis frames buckled and snapped in half. Huge rubber tires incinerated in a microsecond, and massive hydraulic arms shattered into thousands of jagged, burning metal fragments that rained down the sheer rock face. The heat was so intense that the exposed concrete launch pads instantly cracked and turned to gray dust. Before the deafened ground crews could even attempt to run, the second sequence of bombs struck the reinforced tunnel entrances behind the pads. The heavy steel penetrators drove directly through the 40-ton iron blast doors, burying themselves deep inside the subterranean caverns before exploding. The underground shockwave blew horizontally out of the tunnel mouths, roaring like a furnace exhaust. The blast carried a deadly, high-velocity wave of pulverized rock, shattered steel grating, and burning diesel fuel out over the cliff edge. The internal mountain corridors collapsed entirely, sealing the heavy generators and the remaining launch crews under millions of tons of shifting Zagros rock. Down in the narrow canyon, the trapped command convoy felt the catastrophic impact before they even heard the thunder. The massive acoustic pressure wave rolled violently down the steep mountain walls, physically lifting and slamming the heavy 26 command vehicles against the dirt road. Armored windshields shattered instantly inward, spraying the horrified radar operators and sector commanders with a storm of broken glass. Massive boulders shook loose from the upper ridges, plummeting hundreds of feet down into the dark valley and smashing into the unpaved road alongside the trucks. Thick black smoke, burning rocket propellant, and a heavy rain of twisted mechanical debris fell directly onto the roofs of the fleeing convoy. In less than 15 seconds of concentrated violence, the primary strategic threat to the eastern approach of the Strait of Hormuz had been physically erased from the map. The heavily fortified mountain battery, designed to sink enemy fleets and dominate the sea lanes for hundreds of miles, was now nothing more than a chain of smoking black craters bleeding fire into the night sky. The heavy launchers were gone, but the battle in the canyon was just beginning. The American strike package had already dropped its second wave of specialized munitions, and the deadly payload was now falling directly toward the trapped command trucks below. The heavy launchers were gone, but the surviving Iranian defenders in the canyon refused to surrender the night without a fight. Down on the lower ridges and scattered along the dirt valley floor, the short-range air defense crews realized their strategic umbrella had been completely shattered. Their long-range early warning radars were flooded with relentless white static, and their heavy cruise missiles were currently burning into the rock high above them. But they still had their localized, optical, and infrared weapon systems. The surviving sector commander, bleeding from shattered glass inside one of the armored trucks, screamed over the short-range tactical radio for all remaining anti-aircraft units to create a physical wall of fire over the trapped convoy. Dozens of rapid-fire anti-aircraft artillery emplacements bolted to the mountain shoulders violently woke up. Heavy twin-barreled 23mm and 30mm mechanical cannons pivoted their thick muzzles straight up toward the black clouds. The gunners did not have a radar lock, and they could not see the enemy, but they knew the attack was coming from directly overhead. They slammed their boots down on the heavy firing pedals. The deafening roar of mechanical cannons drowned out the sound of the burning diesel trucks and the secondary mountain explosions. Thick, continuous streams of brilliant red tracer rounds ripped upward, cutting through the heavy black smoke billowing from the destroyed peaks. The tracer fire crisscrossed the narrow canyon, creating a deadly, glowing net of heavy lead and high explosives aimed blindly into the freezing stratosphere. On the ground, dozens of infantrymen scrambled out of the shattered transport trucks, hauling heavy shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. They braced their boots against the rocky dirt, hoisting the green launch tubes onto their shoulders. The gunners frantically swept their infrared seekers across the empty sky, waiting for the high-pitched tone of a heat lock. When the seekers caught the faint, lingering thermal exhaust of the high-altitude stealth jets or the intense heat of the recent bomb detonations, the operators pulled their triggers. Solid rocket motors ignited with blinding white flashes, sending dozens of heat-seeking missiles streaking vertically out of the canyon. The heavy backblast threw yellow dust and gravel over the burning command vehicles. The Iranian counterattack was ferociously loud and visually spectacular, but it was fundamentally blind. The American F-35 fighters were operating thousands of feet above the maximum engagement ceiling of the mountain cannons. The heavy red tracer rounds climbed for thousands of feet before losing their kinetic energy, stalling in the thin air, and falling back down onto the rocky slopes like burning rain. The shoulder-fired missiles aggressively tracked the ambient heat of the mountain fires rather than the stealth jets, arcing wildly off course before their internal self-destruct timers triggered. The sky above the Zagros Mountains filled with bright, localized explosions as the defensive missiles detonated against empty air. The canyon was now illuminated by the constant, strobe-like flashes of thousands of anti-aircraft shells exploding harmlessly in the clouds. The defenders were pouring millions of rounds of ammunition into the night, desperately trying to build a physical shield of shrapnel to protect the remaining 26 command vehicles. The air smelled heavily of burnt cordite and raw diesel, but the sky remained terrifyingly empty. The defenders were fighting a ghost. And while the heavy mountain cannons continued to overheat their steel barrels firing at nothing, the American strike package had already banked sharply toward the coast, smoothly making way for the second flight of stealth fighters, waiting patiently in the dark, just off the shoreline. The massive coastal launchers were completely destroyed, but the surviving brain of the defensive network was still exposed on the canyon floor, and the second wave of American ordnance was already dropping through the freezing clouds. While the defenders on the lower ridges burned through thousands of rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition firing at an empty sky, a second formation of American stealth jets broke perfectly over the coastline and opened their weapon bays. These F-35 fighters were not carrying heavy penetrators meant for deep mountain rock. They were armed with specialized racks of precision small-diameter bombs, specifically engineered to saturate mobile ground targets in a single sweeping pass. The lethal munitions dropped away from the aircraft in complete silence, instantly snapping out their composite glide wings and slicing downward through the freezing air. Guided by exact thermal imaging, the swarm of bombs separated and tracked smoothly toward the chaotic, glowing ribbon of headlights snaking through the valley below. Down on the rocky canyon floor, the driver of the lead Iranian command vehicle was pushing his massive multi-axle truck to its absolute mechanical limit, desperate to reach the heavy steel entrance of the secondary tunnel complex just 2 miles ahead. The truck bounced violently over fallen rocks, its heavy suspension screaming as it pulled the mobile sector headquarters away from the burning peaks. Behind him, 25 heavily armored radar vans, communication hubs, and power generators followed blindly in a tight, dust-choked column. Red brake lights flashed through the thick exhaust as the drivers fought to keep their spacing on the dangerous, unpaved road. The first small-diameter bomb struck the lead vehicle with absolute, terrifying precision. The warhead punched cleanly through the heavy armored roof of the cab before detonating directly inside the massive engine block. The violent explosion instantly threw the heavy truck forward, blowing its flaming axles into the air and scattering shattered steel across the narrow road. The burning wreckage slammed violently back down onto the dirt, throwing up a shower of sparks and completely blocking the only forward path through the canyon. Less than a second later, another guided munition slammed down at the very back of the convoy. The heavy rear guard truck, hauling a massive mobile diesel generator, erupted into a towering pillar of yellow fire. Thousands of gallons of raw fuel ignited simultaneously, sending a blinding shockwave of intense heat rolling up the mountain walls. The rear exit of the pass was now permanently walled off by a burning curtain of diesel fuel and twisted metal chassis frames. The remaining 24 high-value command vehicles were suddenly caught in a fatal, inescapable trap. Drivers panicked and slammed their boots down on their heavy air brakes, sending thick clouds of white dust and black tire smoke washing over the column. Armored bumpers smashed violently into each other as the massive trucks skidded, fishtailed, and violently jackknifed across the rocky dirt. The entire mobile brain of the coastal defense network ground to a chaotic, shrieking halt. To their left was a sheer drop down into the black ravine. To their right stood an impossible wall of vertical Zagros rock. Ahead and behind them, impenetrable walls of burning wreckage sealed the road. Inside the surviving trucks, the radar operators and communications officers realized the terrifying reality of their position. They tore off their static-filled headsets and threw open the heavy armored doors. Stepping out into a canyon choked with thick smoke, extreme heat, and the deafening roar of blind anti-aircraft fire above them. The convoy was physically boxed in, completely immobilized, and brightly illuminated by the raging fires of the lead and rear wrecks. The trap was perfectly sealed, and the rest of the small-diameter bomb swarm was already dropping into the valley to finish the job. With the heavy command convoy physically boxed in between walls of burning wreckage on the narrow canyon road, the remaining swarm of small-diameter bombs descended into the fatal trap. There was no time for the surviving radar operators to scatter. The precision munitions fell in perfect sequence, executing a flawless, walking chain reaction of high explosive destruction straight down the tightly packed line of 24 armored vehicles. The canyon floor erupted into a blinding river of fire. The first cluster of bombs slammed directly into the mobile radar processing vans near the front of the column. Heavy steel roofs caved inward under the extreme kinetic force before the internal warheads detonated. Massive composite radar dishes bolted to the truck beds, shattered into thousands of jagged splinters. Heavy cooling units and complex electronic server racks were vaporized in milliseconds. The explosive overpressure blew the heavy armored doors off their hinges, sending them spinning wildly through the black smoke like twisted metal leaves. Millisecond delays separated the strikes as the destruction marched relentlessly down the dirt road. The encrypted communications hubs were hit next. High explosive blasts sheared off the tall radio antennas, dropping the heavy metal masts directly onto the panicked crews, scrambling for the rocky cliff walls. Inside the communications trucks, glowing banks of tactical radios and digital data links were ripped into burning scrap metal. The blasts threw shattered fiberglass, twisted steel plating, and burning insulation high into the night air. The trapped convoy collapsed entirely under the sheer weight of the firepower. Heavy diesel fuel tanks ruptured simultaneously, spilling thousands of gallons of volatile liquid onto the rocky dirt. The rivers of fuel instantly ignited, creating a massive, roaring trench of yellow fire that completely engulfed the surviving chassis frames. Massive multi-axle tires melted into pools of burning black rubber, sending thick, suffocating smoke rising up the sheer Zagros rock face. The immense thermal energy trapped within the narrow canyon walls grew so intense that the surrounding desert boulders began to crack and splinter from the heat. Desperate Iranian officers and technicians who managed to kick open their jammed armored doors threw themselves onto the dirt, scrambling wildly toward the rocky ravine. They crawled over shattered glass and burning debris, trying to escape the apocalyptic heat of the exploding trucks. Behind them, secondary explosions violently rocked the canyon as localized ammunition caches and compressed air cylinders deep inside the mobile generators began to cook off in the flames. High above the valley floor, the short-range anti-aircraft fire finally began to stutter and fail. Without the centralized targeting data from the command trucks, the isolated gun crews on the ridges were shooting blindly until their barrels warped from the heat. As the last communications vehicle at the bottom of the pass blew apart in a shower of sparks, the entire tactical network went completely dead. The command structure that linked the early warning radars, the mountain launchers, and the coastal defense sectors was physically severed. The Iranian defenders were no longer an organized, integrated military force. They were entirely broken, reduced to isolated, terrified survivors trapped in a burning gorge, watching the brain of their coastal defense network burn down to the axles. As the last communications vehicle blew apart and the entire tactical network went completely dead, the American stealth fighters smoothly closed their weapon bays and banked south toward the dark expanse of the Persian Gulf. Their mission was absolutely complete. Without a single radio transmission, the strike package slipped back into the high-altitude freezing air, their radar signatures vanishing entirely from the scattered, surviving early warning monitors along the coast. The immediate kinetic battle was over, but the Zagros Mountain Pass was now a massive, unstable disaster zone. Down in the canyon, the deafening roar of falling bombs was rapidly replaced by the violent crackling of heavy diesel fires and the terrifying groan of collapsing rock. Less than 10 miles away on the outskirts of Bandar Abbas, civilian and military emergency sirens shrieked into the night. A massive column of Iranian rescue units, heavy fire engines, armored military ambulances, and recovery cranes raced up the winding dirt roads toward the shattered base. Red and blue emergency lights flashed frantically against the thick black smoke that was already spilling out of the valley mouth. But the rescue convoy never reached the wreckage. The lead fire engines slammed on their heavy air brakes, skidding to a halt at the edge of the canyon. The unpaved road ahead was physically impassable. The flaming remains of the rear guard truck blocked the path, and behind it, A continuous river of burning diesel fuel flowed downhill, feeding a blinding wall of yellow fire. The heat radiating out of the pass was so extreme that the plastic light fixtures on the front of the ambulances began to warp and melt. Heavy transport tires and thick composite armor plates from the 26 destroyed command vehicles were reduced to glowing white slag. Desperate Iranian firefighters unspooled their heavy canvas hoses and dragged them through the rocky dirt. They pumped thousands of gallons of pressurized water directly into the flames, but the sheer volume of burning military fuel and vaporized electronics instantly turned the water into scalding white steam. Medics grabbed their emergency kits and attempted to climb the sheer rocky slopes to bypass the fiery road, but the mountain itself actively fought back. High above them, the ruined concrete launch pads were still suffering from catastrophic secondary explosions. Deep inside the shattered tunnels, massive stockpiles of unspent solid rocket propellant continued to cook off. The subterranean blasts sent deep, localized earthquakes rolling down the cliff walls. Heavy boulders, cracked concrete, and burning pieces of massive hydraulic arms tore loose from the peaks and plummeted into the valley, smashing into the canyon floor. The falling debris forced the rescue teams to scramble back to their vehicles, totally unable to reach the trapped survivors or stabilize the burning wreckage. The battlefield control had shifted entirely to the fire and the shattered rock. The Iranian officers standing near the blocked entrance stared into the roaring inferno, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of the burning convoy. They could not assess the casualties. They could not salvage the radar data. They could not recover the heavy missile frames. The sheer scale of the destruction had effectively paralyzed the immediate response. The most heavily fortified mountain battery in the region was not just damaged, it was entirely inaccessible, burning uncontrollably out of the reach of anyone trying to save it. As the mountain pass continued to burn uncontrollably, the catastrophic reality of the strike reached the deep underground regional command center hundreds of miles away. The massive digital situation board, which normally glowed with a dense, overlapping network of active radar sweeps, anti-aircraft umbrellas, and heavy anti-ship missile kill zones, was violently fracturing. The entire southeastern quadrant of the map, representing the critical Bandar Abbas defensive sector, had simply blinked out of existence. Where there should have been the heavy pulse of long-range early warning radars sweeping out over the Persian Gulf, there was only a massive, dark void. Dozens of communications officers sat frozen in the cold red light of the bunker. They pressed their hands over their headsets, frantically routing encrypted pings through secondary military satellites, buried fiber optic cables, and low-frequency emergency radio bands. They were desperately trying to raise the mountain fortress. They waited for the heavy automated data bursts that would confirm the deep subterranean launchers had survived the bombardment. They waited for the 26 mobile command vehicles to establish a backup tactical network and reassert control over the coastline. But the speakers only hissed with the dead, hollow sound of raw atmospheric static. There were no incoming radar tracks. There was no missile telemetry. There were no voices. The primary brain of the coastal shield was completely dead, and the monitors showed absolutely zero enemy aircraft retreating over the water. The senior regional commanders stepped slowly up to the main tactical deck, staring silently at the gaping black hole on their strategic monitors. The eastern approach to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most heavily fortified and economically vital maritime choke points on the planet, was suddenly completely naked. For over a decade, the massive Zagros Mountain batteries had served as the ultimate deterrent. They had guaranteed that any hostile fleet attempting to force its way into the Persian Gulf would face an overwhelming, inescapable storm of heavy cruise missiles. That iron guarantee had just been completely erased in less than 15 minutes by an invisible force that never even registered on the national grid. The strategic balance of the entire global energy corridor had been violently overturned in the dark. The American strike package had not just vaporized 6 heavy missile frames and 26 armored trucks. They had severed the spine of the coastal defense doctrine. Millions of tons of solid mountain rock, 40-ton steel blast doors, and thousands of miles of integrated early warning architecture meant absolutely nothing against the precision of the stealth ordnance. The commanders realized the terrifying truth. If the invisible fighters could penetrate their heaviest sector completely unseen, execute a flawless combined arms massacre, and egress without taking a single loss, then no missile battery along the 1,000-mile coastline was safe from destruction. The diesel fires raging in the canyon would eventually burn themselves out against the stone, and the collapsed mountain tunnels would become a permanent concrete tomb for the trapped launch crews. But the strategic shockwave was already radiating out from the shattered ridges, triggering emergency alerts across Allied and enemy command centers alike. The impenetrable coastal umbrella was completely shattered. The critical sea lane was utterly exposed, and the officers standing in the quiet underground bunker knew that this devastating surgical strike was only the opening move. The heavily defended door to the Gulf had just been violently kicked off its hinges, and the dark water beyond the strait was now waiting for the main fleet to arrive.